The emergency session had dragged on for 6 hours, and Counselor Drath was losing patience with the primitive species from the edge of the galaxy. The insectoid representative clicked his mandibles in annoyance as yet another human transmission request blinked on the chamber's main display. 3 cycles of this nonsense was enough. Earth wanted protection from raiders, and the Council had more important matters to address. Vorin, the Council leader, raised one crystalline appendage to silence the murmuring representatives. "Play it," he commanded with obvious reluctance. "Let us hear what the humans want this time." The hologram flickered to life, and instead of the usual diplomatic envoy, a middle-aged human in grease-stained coveralls appeared. He stood in what looked like a warehouse with industrial equipment visible behind him. The man wiped his hands on a rag before speaking. "My name is Frank," the human said without preamble. "We asked nicely for 3 years, we sent diplomats, we filed the proper forms, we followed your protocols." He paused and his expression hardened. "That didn't work, so consider this your only warning, stay away from Earth." The transmission ended abruptly. For a moment the chamber was silent. Then Drath burst into chittering laughter that echoed off the curved walls. "A mechanic," he managed between fits of amusement. "They sent a mechanic to threaten us." Other counselors joined in the mockery. Vorin allowed it for a few moments before calling for order. "The humans lack even basic faster-than-light travel," he stated dismissively. "Their colony ships crawl between systems at sublight speeds. They offer nothing of value to justify council intervention." A reptilian counselor named Gorvan leaned forward. "The Kryn Dominion has been raiding human settlements for resources," he pointed out. "Perhaps we should at least investigate the claims." Drath's laughter cut off sharply. "The Kryn take what they need from undefended primitives," he said coldly. "That is the natural order. If humans cannot protect their own colonies, they deserve to lose them." Vorin nodded in agreement. "The matter is settled. The Kryn Dominion is authorized to continue operations in human space." He paused, considering. "In fact, send 3 warships to Earth itself. These primitives need to understand their place in the galactic hierarchy." Admiral Toth of the Kryn Dominion received his orders. With satisfaction, teaching lessons to upstart species was always entertaining. He selected 3 of his best warships for the task: Blade of Justice, Serpent's Fang, and Iron Hammer. Each vessel carried enough firepower to reduce a city to ash. Against a species without shields or energy weapons, this would be a simple demonstration. "Set course for Earth's moon colony," Toth instructed his navigation officer. "We will destroy it first as an example. Then we will demand tribute from the home world." His crew acknowledged with enthusiasm. This was easier than their usual assignments. Back on Earth, Frank stood in the same warehouse and watched the last civilian transport lift off from the nearby spaceport. The evacuation had taken 2 weeks, but every non-essential person was now safely away from major population centers. He pulled out a communicator and spoke into it. "They rejected the warning," he said quietly. "Proceed with final preparations." Beneath his feet, the warehouse floor began to rumble. Massive hydraulic systems engaged, and the entire structure started descending into the ground. As it lowered, Frank could see the true facility spreading out around him. Rows upon rows of soldiers in unmarked armor performed final equipment checks on weapons that looked cobbled together from mining equipment and industrial machinery. A young woman approached. Her name badge read Rodriguez, and she carried a datapad. "Sir, all lunar emplacements report ready status," she informed him. "The Mars launchers are online. Asteroid belt platforms are armed and awaiting targets." Frank nodded slowly. "How long did we work on this?" he asked, though he knew the answer. 15 years, Rodriguez replied. "Ever since the first Kryn raid hit Colony 7. 15 years of building while simultaneously begging for help. 15 years of converting mining equipment into weapons. 15 years of hollowing out the moon and turning it into a fortress. The Council thought humanity was weak because they asked for protection. They never considered that asking was just buying time." "What about the civilian fleet?" Frank asked. Rodriguez checked her datapad. 2,000 converted colony ships are positioned at jump coordinates. Each one has a volunteer crew. They know it's a one-way trip. Frank felt the weight of that statement. 2,000 ships meant at least 10,000 volunteers willing to die. Not soldiers, just ordinary people who had lost family to Kryn raids. Teachers, mechanics, farmers, all trained to pilot converted ships on suicide runs if necessary. The warehouse reached its final depth 300 meters below the surface. The ceiling closed above them and lights shifted from white to red. Combat protocols were now active. Around the facility, similar installations came online across every continent. Earth had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. "Sir," Rodriguez said hesitantly, "do you think they'll actually come?" Frank almost smiled. "They always do," he said. "Powerful species never believe that patience can be strategic. They think if we're asking for help, we must be helpless." He gestured at the soldiers, the weapons, the massive underground complex. "They're about to learn the difference between asking nicely and asking permission." An alarm chimed softly. The main display showed Kryn warships entering the solar system, 3 vessels moving toward the moon with obvious hostile intent. Around Frank, soldiers moved to their positions with practiced efficiency. No one spoke. No one panicked. They had drilled for this scenario thousands of times. Frank walked to a console and activated the Lunar Defense Network. On the moon's surface, concealed emplacements began powering up. Railgun systems that had been disguised as mining equipment for over a decade rotated into firing positions. The entire moon had become a weapon aimed at anyone foolish enough to approach. "Send one more message to the Kryn fleet," Frank instructed. "Give them a chance to turn around." Rodriguez transmitted the warning. The response came quickly, mocking laughter and a threat to bombard Earth cities. Frank had expected nothing less. "All stations," he announced over the facility-wide comm system. "Weapons free, show them what patience built." High above on the lunar surface, the first railgun fired. Admiral Toth watched the fleeing civilian transports with predatory satisfaction. The pathetic human vessels crawled away from their moon colony at barely a fraction of light speed. His 3 warships could destroy them all within minutes. He intended to do exactly that as soon as Blade of Justice moved into optimal firing range. "Admiral," his weapons officer called out, "I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the lunar surface." Toth barely glanced at the readings. "Mining." "Equipment," he dismissed. "The humans are probably trying to evacuate their ore processing facilities." He focused on the tactical display showing the fleeing transports. "Target the slowest vessel. Fire when ready." The weapons officer began the targeting sequence. That was when the moon exploded. Not literally, but that was Toth's first impression as hundreds of concealed hatches blew open across the lunar surface. Massive structures rose from underground silos. They were railgun emplacements, each one the size of a small building. Toth had perhaps 2 seconds to process this information before the first salvo fired. The rounds were simple tungsten rods traveling at 90% of light speed. No explosives, no fancy technology, just solid metal accelerated to relativistic velocities. They crossed the distance to Serpent's fang in a heartbeat. The warship's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, might as well have been paper. The first rod punched through the shield envelope without slowing. It entered the ship's bow, traveled the entire length of the vessel in microseconds, and exited through the stern. The kinetic energy transfer was catastrophic. Serpent's fangs simply came apart. Hull plates peeled away like foil, internal bulkheads vaporized from the shockwave. The fusion reactor lost containment. Toth watched in horror as one of his finest warships died in under 3 seconds. "Evasive maneuvers," he screamed. "Return fire all batteries." Iron Hammer managed to bring its plasma cannons to bear on the lunar surface. The superheated bolts carved massive craters into the regolith. For a moment, Toth thought they had destroyed the emplacements. Then he realized the targeting data was already outdated. The railgun positions were moving. "They're on rails," his tactical officer reported with disbelief in his voice. "The entire lunar surface is networked. They fire and relocate before we can counterattack." Of course they did. Toth understood the strategy immediately. Humans had converted their entire moon into a mobile fortress. Every emplacement could fire from one position and then slide through underground tunnels to emerge somewhere else. His ships were fighting an enemy that used a celestial body as both weapon and armor. The second salvo struck Iron Hammer. 2 rods hit the engine section. The warship lurched violently as its primary drive systems failed. Emergency alarms shrieked. Across all channels, Toth knew Iron Hammer was crippled. The crew might survive, but the ship would never fight again. "How long?" Toth demanded. "How long must they have been building this?" His intelligence officer ran the calculations. "Based on the scale of construction, at least 10 to 15 years, Admiral." The officer's voice shook. "They were building this while sending diplomats to the council." Toth felt cold understanding settle over him. Humans had never been weak. They had been buying time. Every diplomatic mission, every formal request, every properly filed petition had been a delaying tactic. While the council laughed at their primitive status, humans had been turning their moon into a weapon that could kill warships. Blade of Justice shuddered as something impacted the hull, not a railgun round, but something smaller, dozens of impacts across the ship's surface. Toth checked his sensors and cursed. Small craft were swarming his vessel. They had launched from Earth while his attention was fixed on the lunar defenses. "What are those?" he asked. "Modified mining vessels," his tactical officer reported. "Construction shuttles, cargo haulers, civilian craft that have been weaponized." Toth magnified the image. The human vessels were ugly, welded-together constructions with oversized engines and crude weapon mounts. They carried industrial tools, plasma cutters, welding torches, mining lasers. Against a warship, these should have been useless, but there were so many of them. The swarm tactics were brutally effective. Individual craft targeted specific systems. One group focused on the sensor array. Another attacked the communication dishes. A third concentrated fire on the point defense batteries. Blade of Justice began losing capabilities one by one. It was death by 1,000 cuts. A human voice crackled over the open comm channel. "You were warned," the speaker said simply. Then the channel went dead. Toth tried to hail Earth. He was willing to negotiate. He would accept surrender terms. Anything was better than this systematic dismantling of his fleet. But the only response was that same mechanic from the earlier transmission. "We gave you a warning," Frank said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "You gave us a target, thank you for that." The lunar railguns fired again. This time all remaining emplacements coordinated their fire on Blade of Justice. Toth saw the rounds coming on his display. He knew his shields could not stop them. He knew his armor would not slow them. He had time to understand that he had failed, that he had led his crews into a trap built over 15 years. The round struck. Toth's last sight was the lunar surface rushing toward him as his ship's trajectory degraded. Then there was nothing. The Galactic Council received the distress signals 40 minutes later. By then, all 3 Kryn warships were debris. The chamber descended into chaos. Counselors shouted accusations. The Kryn representative demanded immediate retaliation. Vorin called for fleet mobilization. Drath stood and declared that this had to be a fluke. "Humans cannot have defeated 3 military vessels," he insisted. "There must have been a malfunction, a reactor failure." That was when Frank's second transmission arrived. It played automatically on every council channel. The mechanic appeared again, standing in the same warehouse. "We asked you to leave us alone," he said. "You sent warships, send more if you want, we'll be waiting." The transmission shifted to show footage from the lunar surface. Hundreds of railgun emplacements rotated in perfect synchronization. All of them turned to face outward toward space, toward the rest of the galaxy. The message was clear. Earth had teeth and would use them. The council chamber fell silent. Even Drath had stopped talking. They were staring at a species they had dismissed as primitive, a species that had just destroyed 3 advanced warships using mining equipment and physics. Gorven finally spoke into the silence. "I suggest we reconsider our approach to Earth," he said quietly. No one disagreed. Fleet Admiral Gorven had fought in 17 campaigns across 40 years of service. He had commanded fleets against pirates, rebels, and hostile alien civilizations. Never once had he felt the cold knot of uncertainty that now twisted in his gut as he reviewed the lunar battle recordings for the 100th time. 40 warships, he muttered to himself. The Council sends me 40 warships to crush one planet. His second-in-command, a veteran officer named Rella, stood beside him studying the tactical display. The humans used preparation and defensive positioning, she observed. In open space, our superior technology should prevail. Gorven wished he shared her confidence. The fleet represented 6 different galactic powers each, contributing their finest vessels, dreadnoughts, carriers, and heavy cruisers, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Yet he could not shake the feeling that he was leading his people into a carefully prepared trap. "Begin the advance," he ordered. "But methodical approach, full sensor sweeps every 1,000 kilometers. I want to know about every piece of debris larger than my fist." The fleet emerged from jump space at the edge of Earth's solar system. Immediately, Gorven ordered a cautious advance rather than the aggressive push his orders demanded. Something about the emptiness bothered him. Human settlements should have been visible, mining operations, cargo traffic. Instead, there was nothing but abandoned stations and drifting hulks. They crossed the outer planets without incident. Gorven's unease grew with each quiet kilometer. Where were the humans? Why no resistance? The fleet reached the asteroid belt, and that was when everything went wrong. Proximity alarms screamed across every ship simultaneously. Thousands of objects activated throughout the belt. They were not ships. They were weapons platforms built into hollowed asteroids. Each one bristled with missile tubes and kinetic launchers. Gorven barely had time to shout a warning before the belt came alive with fire. The platforms launched everything at once. Crude missiles with basic guidance systems, kinetic projectiles that were little more than rocks accelerated to high velocity, simple weapons that any industrial civilization could manufacture. But there were thousands of them, tens of thousands. Gorven's point ships engaged with point defense systems. They destroyed hundreds of incoming projectiles, then thousands. But the platforms kept firing. His advanced targeting computers became overwhelmed trying to track so many individual threats. Ships began taking hits. "They're networked," Rella reported. "Each platform shares targeting data. Destroying one doesn't stop the others. They adapt to our defensive patterns." Of course they did. Gorven watched as his fleet's sophisticated weapons systems struggled against sheer numbers. Humans had turned quantity into quality. They had spent years building these platforms, hiding them in asteroids, waiting for someone to be foolish enough to approach their home world. "Push through," he commanded. "Maintain formation, accept the losses." 3 cruisers died in the belt crossing, their shields worn down by constant impacts, their hulls breached by lucky shots that found vulnerable points. Gorven felt each loss like a personal wound, but he kept his fleet moving. They would reach Earth with enough strength to force surrender. Then Mars lit up. The red planet had been quiet during the approach. Gorven's sensors had detected what appeared to be abandoned terraforming equipment, massive electromagnetic launchers sitting dormant on the Martian surface. He had assumed they were industrial relics. They were not relics. Every launcher activated simultaneously. They began hurling container-sized projectiles at velocities that made Gorven's blood run cold. Each container was packed with ball bearings, scrap metal, industrial waste. At orbital velocities, garbage became shrapnel, deadly, unavoidable shrapnel. "Reduce speed," Gorven ordered. "If we hit that debris field at combat velocity, it will tear through our hulls." The fleet slowed. Formation integrity collapsed as faster ships pulled ahead and damaged vessels fell behind. Exactly what the humans wanted. Gorven realized too late that every defensive system was designed not to destroy his fleet, but to disrupt it, to break up his coordinated attack into scattered, vulnerable groups. He intercepted human communications, expected military coordination and tactical orders. Instead, he heard civilians, a teacher coordinating asteroid platform fire, an engineer managing the Martian launchers, a farmer operating weapons systems designed for a conflict these people never wanted. "Admiral," Rella said quietly, "this is not a military defending its territory." Gorvan nodded. He understood. This was an entire species mobilized for war. Every human was a combatant, every structure a potential weapon. They were fighting an enemy that had chosen extinction over subjugation, an enemy with nothing left to lose. The fleet reached Earth orbit with 28 ships remaining. Gorven could bombard the planet. He had enough firepower, but the lunar fortress was still operational. Surface-to-orbit weapons were tracking his vessels. Every minute in orbit cost him more ships to attrition fire from hidden emplacements. His comm system chimed with an incoming transmission from the Council. Voron's face appeared. "Admiral, begin planetary assault immediately." Gorven looked at Earth below, looked at his battered fleet, looked at the thousands of potential. "Combatants on that world, Counselor," he said carefully, "I recommend we open negotiations." "Negotiations," Voron sputtered. "You have 28 warships, they have primitive weapons, crush them." Drath's face joined the transmission. "This is an example for the entire galaxy. Show them what happens when primitives challenge their betters." Gorven thought about his crew, about the families waiting for them, about the cost of pride versus the price of wisdom. He made a decision that would end his career. No. The silence on the comm was absolute. "No," Gorven repeated. "I will not sacrifice my people for your arrogance. You created this situation. You dismissed their requests. You authorized raids on their colonies. You taught them that mercy is weakness." He looked directly at Voron. "We created this enemy. This is our fault." He switched to fleet-wide broadcast. "All ships broadcast on all frequencies. We acknowledge Earth's strength. We seek terms for ceasefire." Drath screamed something about cowardice. Voron threatened court-martial. Gorven ignored them both. He waited for Earth's response. It came from Frank. "Now you want to talk," the mechanic said. "Now we have your attention, but Admiral, we're not done making our point." The transmission ended. Gorven watched his sensors. Something was rising from Earth's oceans. Massive structures that had been hidden underwater for years, launch platforms, and from them, thousands of vessels began emerging, ungainly converted civilian ships with oversized engines. They were not heading toward his fleet. They were heading for the jump points, heading out of the system. Gorven understood. Earth was not defending anymore, Earth was attacking. Governor Renth had ruled the Kryn colony world of Volta Prime for 12 years without incident. The orbital stations processed ore from the asteroid mines. Civilian transports came and went on predictable schedules. Everything was orderly. Everything was controlled. Then the alarms started screaming and orderly civilization ended. "Unidentified vessels approaching," his defense coordinator reported. "Multiple contacts. They are not responding to hails." Renth pulled up the sensor data. Dozens of craft were burning toward his orbital infrastructure at speeds that should have torn their hulls apart. The vessels were grotesque. Welded together modules with engines far too large for their frames, they looked. Like flying scrap yards. "Activate defense platforms," Renth ordered. "Destroy them before they reach orbit." The automated defenses engaged. Plasma batteries and missile systems locked onto the approaching targets. The first wave of human ships died in bright explosions. Then the second wave. Then the third. Renth began to relax. His defenses were working. These primitive vessels could not penetrate his orbital shield. Then one got through. A single human ship survived the defensive fire. Its hull was scorched and breached in a dozen places. By all logic, it should have lost life support. Instead, it continued accelerating directly toward Volta Prime's primary fuel depot. Renth had 5 seconds to understand what was happening. The ship impacted at .9 light speed. The kinetic energy release was equivalent to a strategic weapon. The fuel depot vaporized instantly. The explosion chain reacted through the connected stations, refineries, habitats, docking facilities. Renth watched in horror as 15 years of infrastructure construction died in a single blinding flash. The shockwave hit the planet's upper atmosphere, created auroras visible from the surface. Renth's people would see those lights and know their prosperity had just ended. Without the orbital stations, Volta Prime would struggle to feed its population. "Sir," his communications officer said shakily, "we are receiving a transmission. It played before the attack." Renth accessed the recording. A human face appeared, not a soldier, just an ordinary person. "You raided our colonies," the human said. "We asked for protection, you laughed, now you understand." The transmission included a list. Names of human settlements hit by Kryn raids, dates, casualty figures. Renth felt cold realization. This was not random violence. This was calculated revenge. Each attacking ship had been piloted by someone who lost family to Kryn aggression. They were not soldiers following orders. They were survivors seeking justice. Across the galaxy, 11 other worlds experienced similar attacks. Human ships appeared in Kryn systems. They ignored military targets, struck infrastructure instead. Fuel depots, manufacturing centers, communication relays, each impact crippled colonial operations. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session. Panicked reports flooded in from multiple powers. Human vessels had faster-than-light capability. That changed. Everything, the primitives who could barely crawl between stars at sublight speeds, had been hiding functional jump drives. "How is this possible?" Vorin demanded. "Our intelligence indicated humans lacked this technology." An analyst stepped forward nervously. "They do lack it, counselor, in the traditional sense." She activated a holographic display. "The attacking vessels are not warships. They are converted colony ships, generation ships designed for decades-long voyages. The humans installed jump drives into existing civilian infrastructure." Drath slammed an appendage against his desk. "Where did they get jump drive technology?" "They built it themselves," the analyst replied. "Our assessment is that humanity has possessed the theoretical knowledge for years. They lacked the resources to implement it on a large scale. So they built slowly, secretly, hidden shipyards in asteroid fields, dark moon facilities, every cargo hauler and mining barge quietly converted to military use." Gorvan listened to the reports with grim understanding. Humans had built an entire fleet while pretending to be helpless. They had created weapons from civilian tools, turned mining ships into kinetic missiles, and they had done it all while filing proper diplomatic requests with the Council. "Recall all fleets," a counselor from the Threll Confederation suggested. "We must defend our home systems." Vorin hesitated. "That would leave Earth unthreatened." "Earth is not the threat," Gorvan interjected. "Earth is building ships faster than we can destroy them. Every day we waste on offense, they gain strength. This is a war we cannot win through conventional force." That was when Frank's transmission played across all Council channels. The mechanic appeared again. "We've mapped every one of your colonies," he said. Behind him, massive manufacturing facilities were visible, humans working triple shifts to produce more converted ships. "We know where you live. We know what you value. Pull back your fleets and we'll talk. Keep fighting and we'll show you what desperation creates." The transmission included detailed intelligence, maps of Council military installations, fleet positions, supply routes. The humans had been gathering information for years. While begging for protection, they had been planning for war. The Council chamber erupted in shouting. 3 members broke ranks immediately. They withdrew their ships from Gorvan's fleet, announced separate peace negotiations with Earth. Drath accused them of cowardice. They responded by pointing out that continued fighting would bankrupt their civilizations. Vorin tried to maintain control. He called for unity, for a coordinated response. But the fractures were already appearing. Each council member looked at their own colonies and saw potential targets, saw infrastructure they could not afford to lose, saw populations they needed to protect. Gorven received orders to return immediately to defend the council's core systems. He complied without argument. As his fleet prepared to jump, he sent a private message to Vorin. "We created this enemy. We taught them that mercy is weakness. We showed them that asking for help is futile. This is our fault. We pushed patient people too far." The fleet disappeared into jump space. Behind them, Earth remained undefeated. Gorven suspected it would stay that way. The galaxy had awakened something it did not understand. A species that would rather die fighting than live subjugated. A people who turned patience into strategy and desperation into strength. In the council chambers, Drath organized the holdout powers. 4 members still believed force would prevail. They began planning a final assault, a decisive strike that would crush human resistance. Gorven heard about the plan and sent one more message to the council. "You are making a mistake." They did not listen. They never did. The memorial stood on a hillside overlooking what used to be Colony 7, 40,000 names carved into black stone. Each one a human life lost to Kryn raids while Earth begged the council for protection. Frank visited once a month. Today he brought news the dead deserved to hear. 6 months had passed since the war began. The galaxy looked different now. 4 council powers had fractured away to make separate peace with Earth. 3 more were negotiating terms. Only Drath and his coalition of holdouts still believed force would work. Frank touched the memorial stone. "We made them listen," he said quietly. "Took longer than it should have, cost more than it needed to, but they are listening now." Behind him, a young officer approached. "Sir, human delegation is ready for departure. Council station is expecting us." Frank nodded, turned away from the memorial. The dead could not care about politics, but their deaths had changed the galaxy that mattered. The council station orbited a neutral world. 7 counselors waited in the chamber. The 4 holdouts were notably absent. Frank entered with 24 Earth representatives. They wore simple jumpsuits. No uniforms, no weapons, just people who had been farmers and mechanics before the galaxy forced them to become warriors. Vorin opened the session. His crystalline body had lost some of its former luster. Leadership during a failed war did that. "The Council recognizes Earth's delegation," he said formally. Frank did not bother with formalities. "We came here 3 years ago and asked for help," he stated. "You laughed at us, called us primitives, let raiders destroy our settlements while we filed proper paperwork." He activated a holographic display. 40,000 dead, 18 colonies attacked, 3 years of requests ignored. The chamber was silent. "Earth demands formal recognition as a sovereign power," Frank continued. "All expansion into human-claimed space ends immediately. The Kryn Dominion pays reparations for attacks on our colonies. Any future aggression meets total war. These are requirements, not negotiations." Drath's holographic image appeared. He had refused to attend in person but could not resist commenting. "You lack the strength to enforce these demands," he declared. 4 warships, maybe 6 converted civilian vessels. The Council commands thousands. Frank smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Would you like a demonstration?" He activated another display, real-time tracking of human ships throughout Council space. Thousands of vessels positioned near critical infrastructure, fuel depots, communication hubs, manufacturing centers, each one a potential suicide attack. "This facility belongs to your government," Frank said to Drath. He highlighted a remote mining station. "Watch carefully." A human ship appeared on the display, fired a single kinetic round. The projectile passed within meters of the station's reactor core, close enough to prove capability, far enough to show restraint. "We can do this to every installation you have," Frank said calmly. "Right now, simultaneously, your choice is simple: accept our terms or start evacuating your colonies." Gorven spoke up. The admiral had been serving as military advisor to the Cooperative Council members. "I have reviewed Earth's intelligence gathering," he confirmed. "Their targeting data is accurate. A coordinated strike would cripple infrastructure across dozens of systems." One of the cooperative counselors leaned forward. "What guarantees does Earth offer?" she asked. "How do we know you will honor peace terms?" Frank gestured to his delegation. "We are miners, engineers, teachers. We never wanted to be soldiers. Give us a reason to stop fighting, and we will." He paused. "But understand this. We remember every colony you let burn, every request you ignored, every time you laughed at our diplomats. We remember all of it." The vote came quickly. 7 counselors recognized Earth's demands, agreed to withdraw forces from human space, committed to trade agreements and technology sharing. The 4 holdouts, led by Drath, refused. The council officially split. Frank addressed the holdouts via transmission. "You still have time to make the smart choice," he said. "Most of your allies accepted peace. You can too." Drath responded with rage. "The Kryn Dominion does not negotiate with primitives." He assembled a coalition fleet, 15 warships from the holdout powers, one final assault to crush Earth and restore council authority. The fleet entered Sol system 2 weeks later. Drath expected fierce resistance, found nearly nothing. Earth orbit was quiet. The lunar fortress operated at minimal capacity. Only a handful of defense platforms were active. "They are hiding," Drath declared. "Cowering in their holes, find their fleet and destroy it." His sensors swept the system, found massive energy signatures everywhere, every asteroid, every moon, every piece of space debris larger than a shuttle, all of it activated simultaneously. Humans had not just weaponized the moon, they had weaponized everything. The entire solar system was a fortress. Thousands of hidden platforms, each one tracking Drath's fleet, each one locked and loaded. Frank's voice came over all channels. "You had your warning, you had your chance. We're done being patient." The platforms opened fire, coordinated volleys from every direction. Drath's ships tried to maneuver, tried to return fire. It did not matter. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, just weapons platforms and kinetic rounds and patient humans who had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. Drath's flagship died within 5 minutes. The rest of his fleet followed within the hour. No survivors, no prisoners, just debris and a message to the galaxy. Earth had patience, but patience has limits. 1 year later, Frank stood in the same council chamber. This time, Earth held a permanent seat. The 13th major power, human vessels patrolled their territories openly. Former raiders avoided human space entirely. A young counselor asked how humanity defeated superior forces. Gorvan, now teaching at Earth's Naval Academy, answered, "They didn't defeat us with technology, they defeated us with conviction. They made peace more appealing than war." Frank retired from leadership, visited the memorial one final time. The names were still there, still remembered. "We gave them a warning," he said to the stone. "They didn't listen, so we made them understand." The galaxy had learned, patience is not weakness, asking for help is not surrender, and pushing desperate people too far creates warriors.